Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Aaron Barnett, and this is my wife.
Hey, I'm Hannah.
Hannah Barnett. We are super excited to host this conversation on Leadership Network, diving into a great conversation around human suffering and rest. We have two really incredible leaders, my friend Danny and my friend Colby. They're powerhouses. They love God and they're passionate about the next generation. What I'm really excited about in this conversation around the next generation is around mental health and how to help them through the lens of testing or trials or hurt or pain. And so I'm really excited for this convo. I would love to kick it off to Colby. Colby, if you want to just introduce yourself real quick, that would be awesome for those that are watching.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah,
Really excited to engage these topics because I think they're really important, especially for how they relate and engage the next generation of leaders and young people. So thanks for having me be here. And my name's Colby. I'm a pastor. Oh, I think my light went out here. But I'm a pastor in Portland, Oregon. Can you guys see me okay still?
Yeah, bro. You're good.
Okay. I'm a pastor here in Portland, Oregon, and basically just started a new church called Bloom. So we had launched in September of 2021, so just 1 year ago. And basically we've just been kind of just plugging away at what God has been doing, how he's been leading us as a community collectively, especially through the pandemic. We kind of started during the pandemic. So we had obviously a lot of ups and downs with that. As you can imagine, trying to launch a church during a global pandemic, especially in a city like Portland, which already has its challenges, was really intense and crazy. Wow. But God had led us through, and we've seen him move in just a powerful way. And so our focus really as a church is really how we can equip and empower people both to find their God-given gifts and their God-given identity, like what things has God given them and how he's empowered them with unique gifts and opportunities to really impact the world for the kingdom. So we're really wanting to empower people with like, hey, this is how God has created me. This is how he has wired me. And this is how I want to impact my world. And so kind of vocational direction and career assessment and just empowering people to go out into the workplace to make a difference for Christ. Yeah, that's really what our focus is. So yeah. And obviously we've had just a crazy season during the pandemic in online ministry, and just online ministry has been really taking off, and just seeing thousands of salvations and different people reaching out, suicides prevented, and just, God has been working in a lot of different ways like that too. So it's really great to see.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Let's go. We're so glad you're here, Colby.
Yeah. Awesome. Colby, thank you so much for coming on. I'm really excited for what you're going to bring on the show today. Danny, if you want to talk a little bit about who you are, that'd be awesome, man.
Yeah. Oh man, it's such an honor to be here. Got to meet Colby a couple of months ago in Nashville, and it was a blast. And then met the Barnetts about a year ago or so, I think. And I just loved y'all's journey and how you're allowing God to use you as a couple. And so big fans of all of you on the show. And so thank you for letting me be here. It's an honor. And so for me, I'm Danny. Good to meet you guys for those tuning in. And currently I'm in deep South Texas, is what I love to say. We're in a city called McAllen, Texas, about 15 minutes from the Mexican border. Pretty much grew up, born and raised there. Got a call to ministry when I was about 18 years old. And really through a lot of my ministry time, been involved in majority of it's being in student ministry. Right now, as we're recording this, I'm actually at a student camp in the Austin, Texas area, speaking to students. And so it's been a wonderful week, and we've seen God do really cool stuff this week. But also God has allowed me to do just different things. My wife and I did church planting in New York City as well. And so we were also there during the pandemic time, and kind of like you said, Colby, walking through starting this church. We're about a year into it at that point, but we were like, as we're like kind of growing and developing all this energy and excitement, then we just shut down, which was crazy. And so right now God has me back in McAllen, Texas on this role of communications and online pastoring. And so I get to basically do a lot of work of promoting our church and kind of connecting with the people in our community through different like digital platforms, but also connecting to our online community as well. And so we've just seen God do really cool stuff with that, of just seeing people start groups where they are. And one thing we're doing that as I talk to different people in different churches who have an online ministry, that I guess is kind of maybe unique, is I like to say we are using the digital to start the physical. And so we're actually using the online ministry, the online church right now to start physical campuses. And so we kind of see like where's a pocket of people where people are watching from. Let's go connect with those people. Let's go meet them. Let's go have some dinner parties and watch parties. And then we're now seeing a campus starting to develop based off of just where people were at. And so we're like in this journey right now of a hybrid church where one of our campuses, or future campuses, I guess, is 2 weeks in person, 2 weeks online, and we're trying to develop them to become a fully in-person church. And so it's just cool to see what God's doing through that. It's a lot of it is brand new to me, and so we're just on this journey trying to figure it out. And so excited for this conversation today.
That's incredible. Well, we're so glad that you both are here. Both of you represent really unique perspectives on ministry, right? In reality is that what we all can agree on, like you both just mentioned, is that in some way the last couple of years have really shaped us personally, our ministries, and we know the ministries of the people that we're serving, and the lives and the mental health of the people we're serving. And so you all have very different perspectives, right? You work with different age groups, you work in different corners of the country. Danny, you were in New York, now you're in Texas. Colby, you're all the way in Portland, we're in Chicago. And so we kind of get to gather now and have a really honest conversation about what is the state of the next generation's mental health and their perspective on the trauma that's happened in the last couple of years, specifically when it comes to kind of like the suffering that they've seen around them and in their own lives. And you all have a really interesting perspective. I also think we have an interesting perspective because we're all in our 20s and 30s. And so because of that, I find, at least in our lives, and I'm sure you all can relate to this, it sometimes feels like we're the in-between, right? Between a generation trying to figure out the next generation and a generation that is rising up and quickly becoming the leaders of the church. And so we all are pretty hands-on with the next generation. We know them, we're discipling them, we're investing in them. They're the people that are in our apartments or homes. They're the people that are DMing us questions. They're the people that are watching our social media content. Like, we have some sort of pulse on what's happening. And so if you're a senior leader tuning in today, first of all, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being somebody that cares deeply about the next generation. I'm inspired by the fact that you are here. If you're a youth pastor, young adult pastor, if you are just somebody who, man, you wandered onto this show and you work a 9-to-5 job, but man, there's something in you that burns for the next generation and the suffering they've experienced over the last couple of years. We're so glad you're here. And today we really just want to have an open conversation about how to pastor, how to love, how to shepherd the next generation around us. What do we point them to? What do we do with a generation that has been largely shaped by the suffering of the last couple of years? And we all have our own stories of how the suffering, some of the trauma, some of the isolation has affected our own mental health, our own maybe burnout, our own maybe trying to work harder because everything else in our life we can't control, right? Like we all have had some reaction over the last couple of years to what's happened in our world. So before we go into all of the solutions, I wanted us all to just start with some vulnerability, with some realness of how it's affected us as leaders, that the leaders know, man, it's not just them that's felt this. In reality, we're trying to figure out how to pastor people that have walked through something that we've walked through ourselves. So Colby and Danny, would you just kind of share a little bit about, how has the last couple of years affected you as an individual, the suffering, the burnout, the mental health struggles? What does that look like for you the past couple of years? Danny, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I'll share a story really quick. So I've been in ministry now for probably 11, 12 years.
Right.
And a topic I've been, kind of exploring a lot and really has kind of shaped who I am really right now is the topic of rest because of the burnout aspect.
Yeah.
And I remember when I first got into student ministry, we went to like a youth pastors conference in Dallas and those sort of things. And I remember hearing like those youth leaders, like who were speaking on stage and those sort of things, talk about rest.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there thinking, like, I don't want to hear this. I want to know, like, how do I connect with students? How do I plug into teenagers? Like, what do I do?
Right.
Like, give me some fresh ways to share the gospel. Like, I don't need a rest. Like, I'm excited. I'm energetic. Like, let's go and do this. And I think a lot of times that's like the mindset of a lot of young leaders, is that because we're excited, because we're energetic, we often choose like not to implement this spiritual practice that Jesus has given us in resting. And I think kind of a lot of that has kind of caused me in my life to just kind of always be on the go, always looking at the next thing.
Wow.
We do events, we do services, we do like really cool things. But then it's like, okay, like even at an event, a lot of times my mind is like, okay, well, what can I do better? I'm like actively on my notes, like, okay, well, we're doing this right now. It's not that good. So I want to make a note so I don't forget what to do differently, what to do better. And I'm constantly like just on the go. My mind is always working. But I love reading just different spiritual disciplines, different spiritual practices on rest. And it's really helped me, which I wish, one of the things I think that we talk about often is like what I wish I knew when I started ministry, like towards young adults.
Yes.
And I wish I would have taken seriously the discipline of rest. And I think it would have kind of caused some stuff. And then just another quick story on kind of where I was. So I love that you said first off, Hannah, that we're in our 20s and 30s. I thought you were just going to stick to 20s. I am 32, so I'm not in my 20s. But when I lived in New York, I was turning 30, right? So it was around that time. My wife and I had both left full-time jobs from Texas, working at a church,
Wow.
and we're going to a church that doesn't exist, meaning it doesn't pay very well, right? And so we're trying to figure out finances, living in this expensive city, all this other stuff. And I remember like this was the first time that while I was going in energetic and excited once again, because it's a new adventure, that I really felt anxiety. And I had never felt that before. And I felt like my heart was like pumping, and I was like not really offbeat, like it wasn't irregular, but I just felt it. And I was like, what is this? And it happened for like 2 weeks, and I just kind of thought it would go away. And then it wasn't until I finally opened up to my wife, Summer, and told her about it that I really started to feel a little bit better. Then I went to the doctor and things like that. But it was just that weird transition of what God was doing in our lives that I was also trying to be on the go and find a location for our church and try to meet people, that I wasn't really prioritizing a rhythm of resting with him. And then in a new city, and those transitions can really do a lot for us. And like you said, the pandemic, it was a gigantic season of transition for so many people. And I think if we don't kind of maybe do some work with that, like we just kind of pretend like it wasn't there, then it might affect us in the long run. So my hope and prayer is that we would allow ourselves to do work with what we experience. So that's kind of a little bit about my story.
Wow.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing
Yeah,
that.
that's
I
good.
think that's so relatable to so many people, right? And the anxiety, some of the burnout, some of the overwork. And it normalizes this conversation and also helps us identify the moments where we might have written it off as just, oh, that's just what leadership feels like. Oh, that's just what pastoring feels like.
Yeah.
Right.
But then when we have people that are suffering that comes to us, we don't think we can relate to them, or we can't relate to the anxious, 12-year-old that's in our ministries, or we can't relate to the depressed 18-year-old. But when we actually identify, where have I felt some of those same emotions? I think it helps us even be more effective in our ministry towards them. So thanks for sharing that, Danny.
Yeah, that's great.
Colby, what does that look like for you in your life?
Yeah. So for me, I had an early actually burnout in ministry. I burnt out at 22 years old. And so that was 9 years ago.
Wow.
So yeah, it was crazy. And it was kind of a realization where I realized that the pace that I was operating at wasn't sustainable. And it's actually the pace that the world tells us to operate at. And Jesus kind of takes that and he puts that value kind of back in place where it belongs, because the world will tell you to hustle, to grind, to perform, to overproduce, to overload yourself, to overwork yourself, to the point where you've been living in Pharaoh's system of governance, where it's, you have fewer supply, less supply, more bricks, more quotas to meet. And so in that environment of slavery, you burn out and exhaust yourself really quick, which ultimately, leads to a condition of, you deteriorate. So your mental, emotional, and spiritual health, your relationship with God is impacted and affected. People don't realize how pivotal, emotional wellness, emotional health, rest, Sabbath, how well that's integrated, and how it's so highly integrated, both in how we love other people, how we engage with God. Our spiritual life is affected by our mental and emotional life. So, I think Peter Scazzero, he kind of brings those two things together. If you've read Emotionally Healthy Spirituality or Emotionally Healthy Church, but those two things are huge. So for me, I was, 21, 22 years old, burning out because I was operating at the world's pace and not God's pace. And God's pace is a lot slower. And it looks like sustainable rest. It looks like rhythms, work and play, rest and rejuvenation. And so we just have to, I think, really be in touch with the Holy Spirit and ask the Spirit, how fast is he moving? And am I moving ahead of him?
Yeah.
Wow. That's so good.
So good.
Y'all, this is great.
Yeah. This is going to be a great conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for setting up this convo.
Yeah.
Great. I have so many questions rolling around in my mind right now, but I would love to spin it through, the next generation. Human suffering is like, we've maybe have gone through things like from, childhood to middle school to high school to college, so maybe we will enter even into a season of human suffering. And then also with rest, like how does human suffering pair with rest, even with the next generation? How do those two things like pump really well with each other? And so I would love to gear this conversation through the next generation a little bit. Maybe we have some senior leaders watching right now that are pastoring their young adults, pastoring their high school students. What are some things that maybe we can help senior leaders learn about the next generation when it comes down to human suffering and how to pastor them really well, and then also maybe gear them into a place of rest?
Yeah.
Colby, would you want to start us and kick us off with something like that?
Yeah. I mean, in my situation, those two things, rest and suffering, the lack of rest and suffering were so interconnected for me, because my suffering was a result of my inability or unwillingness perhaps to rest and to trust God in that rhythm. So I was launched into a huge season of anxiety, of depression, that I had to battle for years. And it was the hardest season. It was the dark night of the soul. For me, it was a season of just a lot of grief and a lot of tears. But through that process of suffering, I think my eyes were really open to, number one, compassion for people who are suffering, people who are hurting. And there's obviously a variety of reasons why we suffer and why, we go through the things that we go through. But at the end of the day, Jesus' response was always one of compassion. When he saw other people, hurting, other people crying, when he saw, the death of his loved ones or friends like Lazarus, his response was, he was moved so deeply with compassion. Yeah. And I think whenever we see someone, suffering, our response and how we, approach them or how we love them, and we have to lead with empathy. We have to lead with compassion. And I really think Jesus modeled that well. And instead of us having like a fancy set of, theological vernacular or answers to the problem of evil and suffering, it's like, what if our response modeled Jesus's? And like he led with empathy. He approached them with compassion, and he suffered with people. And so I think the beginning point or the starting point with anybody who's going through something, or a Gen Z or next gen who is suffering, or maybe they're just like going through a season, how can we empower them? How can we support them? It has to begin from a place of compassion and empathy.
Yeah,
that's great.
That's a fantastic way to start. Beautiful, Colby.
Yeah, and I think the answer is always looking at Jesus. And there's a lot of different things kind of rolling through my mind right now. Another kind of example that came up, just looking at how Jesus responds to people, is the story of the rich young ruler. It's a powerful story. It's a sad story because we know the outcome of that story, that the rich young ruler chooses his stuff over choosing Jesus. But in Mark chapter 10, verse 21, it says, you know, that you know the commandments, you know what to do. And he's like, I've done all these, Jesus. But then in Mark 10:21, it says Jesus looked at him and loved him, right? And so it's the two things that you talked about, Colby. It's that empathy and compassion, that even though Jesus knew this guy was walking in the wrong direction, a young leader, right, a young person,
so
Jesus continued to look at him and love him. And if you go back to the opening of that passage in verse 17, it says that Jesus was on his way out, like he was on a journey about to go. And a lot of times in moments of Jesus's life, he's like going to another town already, and then somebody stops him, right? Whether it's blind Bartimaeus, he's yelling, Jesus, like, you know, come help me. It's people, disciples, somebody has a question, Pharisees want to poke at him again. While he's on his journey, Jesus is always willing to stop, which is crazy, because we are on our journeys. And I think one of the biggest fears, and one thing I try to do now as I consider pastoring young adults in our church, is I try not to allow the mission of what we're trying to do to overstep like the person and loving them and looking at them. Because I think that's what can happen is churches, we become driven, which is good. We have a mission to go after. There's people in our community that need to hear about the gospel of Jesus. But what can happen is we become very, very like mission focused, and we forget to be like people focused. And we're like, you know, forgetting like, hey, this person's not doing well, and now we're just trying to drag them along in this mission. And so let's be willing to pause. And in those moments, I think when we read into those stories, we often see them as like interruptions, right? But I think Jesus, because of his rhythm of rest and his rhythm of life, he allowed those moments to just come and happen naturally to him, rather than saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to go, I'll see you later. But he listens to his questions, and then he also gives them the answer to his question as well. So, but it's the same thing: empathy, compassion, looking at people, loving people as you're leading, which can be, you know, pretty hard to do, but that's what we're called to do.
Yeah, that's so good, Danny.
Love that.
That's so good. Yeah,
There's
go ahead, Colby.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Danny, you brought something up that I think, you know, I think if and these two things are kind of, this is how I also see how they're highly interrelated, is if we're operating at a pace that's not sustainable, or we are kind of, there's a Japanese theologian, his name's evading me right now, but he said that the pace of God, the pace of love is the pace of God. It's the pace that goes 3 miles per hour, 3 miles per hour. In other words, like if I'm moving so fast that I'm blowing by, hurting, broken people, you know, is like, am I alleviating suffering if I'm moving so fast, right? Because you can only alleviate suffering and so fast and so much that you slow down to heal, and you slow down to touch, and you slow down to listen, and you slow down to have compassion. Because if you're rushing and you're so focused on your agenda, the things that you need to get done, and we're not stopping and listening to individuals, to people, and like kind of walking with them so that we can alleviate their hurt, so that we can alleviate their suffering. So I think that those two things are, like, you know, very related in terms of how we operate and also how we alleviate pain, suffering, and injustice around us.
Wow.
That's good.
Wow.
Come on. I mean, that right there, both of what you just said, is such a powerful, I think, invitation, honestly, for leaders. I know we can all relate to this feeling, this tension that I think we all live in, that being in the work of the kingdom, whether this is our full-time job or whether we're doing something else, we work at a grocery store, we're a teacher, we're a lawyer, and we just love Jesus and are trying to build his kingdom, no matter where we find ourselves, we know the mission of Jesus is never done, right? Like that is, I think, one of the weirdest tensions is we're not at a task here where we're ever going to finally get to the point where we can turn off our computers at the end of the day and say, I think I've fully built the kingdom. And, like that's never going to happen. But conversely, we're also going to reach our own limits, and each of our limits are different. And that's actually okay. And that's good. Right. And so, as we're talking about, the next generation struggling and the next generation burnout, I mean, you all both mentioned you had your burnout at a very young age. I had burnout. I was burnt out at ministry at 20 years old. I had been working already for about 2 years in full-time ministry, and I was in my pastor's office sobbing and saying, I don't know if I've done everything wrong, but I don't even know if I want to do this with my life anymore. I'm so exhausted. Aaron had his mental breakdown in many ways, where he was struggling with a lot of depression and even suicidal ideation at 23, right? Like this happened for us young.
Yeah.
So here we are as leaders, we know what has happened for us young. And at the same time, we have a generation of leaders, and they're seeing sometimes the messages on Instagram and TikTok and social media, and all they're seeing is the hustle. All they're seeing is the grind, especially from some of these like big, mega Christian leaders that they look up to so much. So let's like really start to unpack this. How do we model being the kinds of leaders who are not only talking about the hustle and the grind, while also being clear that we're working hard for the kingdom? Like, how do we do that in the way that we model it for them? And then how do we teach them to develop these rhythms themselves?
Great question.
That's good.
Yeah. Colby, if you want to start us off.
Yeah. I mean, I personally think it begins by, you have to ultimately you have to disciple, you have to train yourself in the rhythms of grace and rest. So it's like really being intentional about, okay, well, how am I leading myself well in this arena or in this avenue or this channel of my life that other people can not only see, right, and model it, because I think if people see me operating at a pace that's not sustainable, I mean, people, they're not gonna want to join me in that pace. And I think we have to make rest a thing of beauty and really a symbol of trust, and a symbol of like, hey, like God rested on the seventh day. In 6 days he created the world. On the seventh day he rested. And it becomes, as we join him and co-join him in that rest, it becomes where we are joining him in like his, like, wow, God's work is good. Like God's work is finished. Like on the cross, when he said it is finished, like we rest in that finished work.
Yes.
And so rest becomes like, it becomes more than simply something that I'm physiologically doing, but as I physiologically or physically join and stop from my work, I'm also spiritually and like rejuvenating my spirit and soul and mind, because I'm like joining in what Christ did. And so I think as we like create these rhythms, and really just like it takes a lot of intentionality and focus, but as we create rhythms in our life, and make kind of rest something to be, I guess the word is like something that's you should be proud of resting. You should take joy in resting. You should communicate that you do rest, because no one does that today. Everybody communicates how much they're doing. Everybody communicates like how hard they're working or how hard they're grinding or but how can we make rest something that is so appealing? And I think it's appealing when people see the end result of it. It doesn't lead to burnout, but it leads to a wholeness. It leads to a sense of life and abundant life. And that is a thing of beauty, and God really wants us to have that.
That's good.
That's great. Wow.
I think for me, just looking at the commandments, it's almost like rest is one that we often just ignore or not put into practice. It's like, okay, don't murder people. Prayerfully, we're not doing that. Don't commit adultery. Prayerfully, we're not doing that. Prayerfully, we're not stealing or you're lying or whatever. But it's just like the commandment of rest. We just almost ignore it as if it's not a part of the commandments. And so thinking we don't really need it. I think modeling it looks different for a lot of people. One thing that just a part of my personality is I'm a type A. I love to organize as best as I can. I love like task lists. And so I'll go and put tasks for every single day. And my favorite thing to do Monday morning when I step into, my office, whatever, is I lay out my weekly calendar. By Monday afternoon, everything changes. It's totally fine. Don't freak out. But I love at least making a plan. And I've heard this illustration before from my pastor and other pastors, but it's like you look at a piece of paper, like you're taught to write within the margins, to operate within that marginal line. Like you don't write on the sides, right? There's a reason for that. And I think that's how we should operate our lives as well. And so for me, just like what works well for me and how I try to model it is I schedule rest within my calendar. So if I'm on Google Cal and I'm color coordinating everything, I'm color coordinating a meeting, color coordinating, a work time that I got to accomplish these different tasks, is I also like coordinate, okay, rest in this moment, right? And I'll get a notification, on my phone, in 10 minutes, you're going to stop working type of thing. And that's just how that's what helps me, right? Is scheduling those times of like, okay, I'm going to wake up at this point, I'm going to get in God's word, I'm going to pray. And that goes back to obviously looking at the rhythm of life of Jesus. Like his mornings were important to him, where he got away from the crowd, and then he modeled that, of just showing like, yeah, like it's, there's a lot to do, right? And we've already talked about that. Like, and Hannah said, we're never going to get to that thing. And I think as we can be overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that we have to do, that it causes us to then start overworking ourselves. And then at that point, we're not really good for anything, because we're going to be burnt out, and we're not going to have any sort of energy or any sort of spiritual endurance to continue on. And so I think we have to be okay with resting, that God is calling us to something. And he's also calling other people to something, to also step into their calling as well. We're going to work together for the kingdom of God. And so it's tough, but it's hard to put ourselves in a place where we're overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that we have to do, and overwhelmed by the amount of people around us that don't know Jesus. And I think when I read the Bible, especially if you go read the book of Mark, right? The best word in the book of Mark is immediately. It's like things are happening fast. And we often miss like the timings that actually took place between like a miracle and a story and things like that. But we read it passage by passage, chapter by chapter, and I'm kind of elaborating here. But we don't really know like the timing of something that actually took place. And Nehemiah, when he hears about the condition of his city, it says in Nehemiah chapter 1 that it's in the month of Chislev, right? And so that's just like a detail that's thrown in there, right? And then he hears about the condition of his city, he breaks down, he starts praying, he starts weeping, he starts fasting. And then in chapter 2, you read it really quick, you can read it in 4 minutes, chapter 1 and chapter 2, but then it says it's the month of Nisan, right? And you look at commentaries, that's like a 4-month time frame. So it took him 4 months of just processing to start doing something to go and then rebuild his city, right? And I think what can happen is when we look at a project, we look at a mission, we look at what's around us, we want to act quickly. But I think what God wants us to do is act obediently. And sometimes that is just resting in the fact like, okay, let's pause, let's pray, let's allow God to be the one to lead. I love what Colby said, the Holy Spirit is moving, and are we moving ahead of him is a question that we have to really, and that's a hard question to answer, right? To consider that. But that's kind of how I model it is I literally calendar it as best as I can, and try to honor days where I'm not off. And let me say this, sorry, and we might go into this in a second. As a senior leader, this is one thing that our pastor prizes, is our office is closed on Fridays. And he gets mad when he finds out somebody was in the office on a Friday. And so he's like, what are you doing there? Like, get out, go home. Sure, Sunday's coming. We're going to be okay. If it's not a perfect service, we're going to be fine, right? And I love that he makes that a priority for us. Like Fridays, don't go into the office type of thing. So,
yeah. And that's a big deal. That's an example of a senior leader modeling it for you, who's a leader, who then can model it for students.
100%.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I had this when Danny, you were talking, and Hannah, you were saying before, like, I think there's never a point, where we're like, oh yeah, our work is done, our work is finished. Like, we always feel like there's more work to do. And I think actually to rest requires, the prerequisite to rest is really humility, because at the end of the day, you need to be able to say that, you know what, I'm not as big of a deal as I think I am. I'm not 100%. That big of a deal. At the end of the day, it's like the world will continue to move forward. God's mission, God's activity on the world will continue to move forward despite my absence, right? It's going to continue to move forward. And so there's a spot where you have to say, I'm not indispensable. I can take time off. I can spend a Sabbath day and just do absolutely nothing and just rest in God, because it takes that kind of posture. So I think we have to model humility well in order to model rest well.
Yeah, that's great. And to pair with that, Colby, I was thinking through, you mentioned, I think blind Bartimaeus, Danny, and what I love about that story of blind Bartimaeus is he had this posture of humility that led him to this place of desperation. Like, this crowd's walking past him. This crowd is trying to silence him, and Jesus meets the crowd with silence, and he's like, hey, quiet down. And Jesus meets blind Bartimaeus right where he's at, and blind Bartimaeus had this desperation in his heart and his soul that can actually lead to potential restoration, right? And we see Jesus like restoring him. My question that I would love to talk about with you guys is through the lens of like when we are dealing with humans, like human suffering, or we're dealing with personal suffering, how have you guys like held on to like humility that was like anchored in hope and like this desperation that there's more to come? There's a beautiful horizon of what God is calling me to. What have you guys personally learned throughout your journey about how to like grapple with suffering, but also like stay in a posture of desperation for hope?
Yeah, I think that's a really good, I think, it's actually necessary for us to wrestle and grapple with these types of subjects, because I think there's too many pat answers to the problem of evil and suffering. And so I think people will often be like, just God's plan, brother, sister, God's trusting God, God's got a plan. And so everything, and people are like, genuinely suffering very deeply. And so some of those answers are more harmful than helpful. And so what I've realized is when you kind of model and kind of look at the ministry of Jesus and the Bible as a whole, it has less to say about why evil exists, and it has more to say about what God is doing to bring an end to evil.
Wow.
It has more to do how he is responding to evil, to suffering, and to injustice. And so I think, the kind of the culmination of that idea is in the man that was born blind. And Jesus and his disciples, the disciples asked Jesus they posed a question: who sinned that he's born this way, right? So in other words, it's like, who's morally culpable, who's morally responsible for this man's plight in his life? Like, who is, because they connected, personal punishment with individual sin back then. And so, they're asking him this question: who sinned, who's responsible? And Jesus, instead of giving, an answer to their question as to why it happened, really what he says is, let's glorify God. Let's glorify God in this. Let's respond in action, and let's reverse what the enemy intended for evil and turn it for his good and for God's glory. And so I think as believers, I think we have to be focused not necessarily on having the right answers in terms of why these things occur, but what are we doing to address evil? How are we standing in the gap? How are we stopping the oppressor? How are we helping the marginalized? How are we stepping in that gap? I think it's so important. Jesus modeled that our response in terms of these things is more important than our explanation of these things.
Wow.
Come on.
Yeah, that's good.
I just want to ask a quick follow-up question to that, Colby, because that's a big part of my heart. And I'm so inspired that you said that. And I really love how you phrased that, right? Like that instead of focusing so much on why is there evil, focus on the response. And I've found, I think maybe Gen X and millennials were very consumed on the question of why is there evil. And I do get this sense that Gen Z might not care as much why there's evil, but is way more consumed with what they can do about the evil.
Exactly.
Do you feel that as well?
Oh yeah, 100%. It's like what I'm doing. Like, I don't want you to like theorize it or give me a like theological picture about it. Like, I want to know, like, not the philosophy, but I want to know, like, what are we doing tangibly to make an impact, to make a difference, to put an end to it.
Exactly.
So I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Which is encouraging, right? And so often, the world gets concerned with some of Gen Z's passion. And again, there is ways that it can become self-centered and not focus on Jesus. But when we identify the ways it is similar to Jesus' heart, it actually unleashes us to encourage the good in it rather than just discourage the bad in it. And I think that's always a way more effective way of inspiring somebody towards Jesus. Danny, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, like thinking about the present suffering. Romans 8 comes to mind, Romans 8:18. I consider that sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is going to be revealed to us. It's this constant reminder of what our inheritance is going to be as believers and followers of Jesus. The big theme of the Old Testament for the Israelites is remember. And what do they constantly do? They forget. And so I'm one thing that helps me a ton is just remembering the works of God. So I love to journal. I love to write down, here's how God's been working in my life. And I think that's a practice that maybe young leaders may not consider as to be like, important. But literally, like, I think those moments of just reflecting on how God has worked is going to help us as we continue to move in how God is working. Because then when suffering comes, and it's a difficult thing to walk through, we then remember like, okay, but God got me through that. Okay. And God moved in this way then. He may move differently now, but it's the same God who's moving in our lives. And so that's one thing that I love to just remind ourselves of the victory. And I think a big thing that we see the Apostle Paul doing is he makes his relationship with God personal. And that's a challenge that I often give to young, to students, to teenagers, to young adults, is we know John 3:16, we know God so loved the world, but you know that God loves you, like make it personal. And Paul does that. Like Paul says, to me, to live as Christ, to die as gain, right? For me, like I want to know him, right? And he really grows and develops his personal relationship with God. And so from that point, I just think it's now you're doing work with your personal relationship with God that's going to allow you to then be observant to the world around you, right? And now you're going to see like, okay, like this is suffering, this is not good, this injustice is not good. But then you see glimpses of God in those moments, and how can I step into that and go and serve? And I think the posture a lot of times is, I'm going to go save. But I think what we need to do is, I'm going to go serve and pray that they're going to one day accept Jesus if they don't know Jesus, right? And I see that often is posture is I'm going to step into this thing that's bad, that's Sodom and Gomorrah, that's whatever, and I'm going to go save. But the posture of Jesus is bent down low with people and go serve. And so that's kind of how I process it.
This is so good. This is great.
So beautiful.
Yeah. So we have around like 15 minutes left. If you guys have any questions, if you want, you can drop them in the chat. We'll have Colby or Danny answer them to the best of their ability. But we are so excited for this conversation. One thing that I would love to, before we get to some questions about human suffering and rest, is I would love to maybe talk about very practical ways when it comes down to maybe leading the next generation. I feel like they're multi-passionate, multifaceted. They care a lot. They want to build a lot. They want to help a lot. How do we pastor and disciple? Like Colby, you talked about Pete Scazzero's book about spiritual maturity or emotional health and spiritual maturity. The lack is discipleship. How do we actually disciple the next generation to become spiritually mature or emotionally healthy when it comes down to suffering and rest? So Colby, if you would want to kick us off maybe on the human suffering part, and then Danny, if you want to talk about rest, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So I think in our community at Bloom, we're predominantly in people in their 20s and 30s. Our congregation is mostly 20s and 30s. And what I've realized is that people have a lot of great ideas about how they want to impact the world, how they want to fight injustice, how they want to alleviate suffering. But what I've realized is that you can only do that so far as you are emotionally well, that you have healed from your past trauma, your pain, you have processed things, you have gone through the hard work to really to heal your inner life, right? And that kind of everything flows out of that. So I really believe it begins by helping people, helping our communities, helping our churches to really disciple and grow in that emotional wellness, in that emotional health, in emotional healing. Identifying how to have healthy relationships, how to manage stress, how to cope with grief, how to go through these things, how to walk with people, how to talk about these things together. Because that comes like from that place when we're well, then our impact is so much greater, but it has to come from a place of sustainability and rest. And so I think when we begin to really disciple people and get really intentional, because we have these programs, we have these outreaches, everybody's so, it's great, the stuff we can do. But if that's coming from a place of exhaustion and overload and unwellness, right? It's like, how effective are we really going to be? How effective is the next gen really going to be if we're not really stewarding people's personal devotion, really stewarding their personal life and their spiritual life with Jesus? Like, how much more so could we do for God's kingdom if we're well? So I really believe it begins by discipling people in terms of their emotional healing and their emotional wellness, and that place of abundance is where we make the impact.
Yeah, that's so good.
So we're working through actually Peter's book with our church right now. Good. So our whole leadership team is working through that book, and we want to hey, this is an area that we want to grow in. so that we can be effective leaders, so that we can make a difference in our community. So that's just one way. We're having somebody come in and coach relationships, how to do relationships well, boundaries, learning how, what are the rhythms of boundary? How do we create boundaries, healthy boundaries, all those things in our church.
Yeah, that's great.
Come on. That's
good.
Love it. Thanks, Colby.
I think for me, I made this illustration a while ago that when we read portions and stories of the Bible, when you read it in verses and passages and chapters, you read it really fast. You may not be able to process and contemplate the timing that it actually took place. That's social media too. Is we fall into what I often like to call the temptation of comparison. That we see what other churches are doing and we want to be there, right? Right away. And these churches are doing amazing things for the gospel in their city, and so then we see that we're like, oh, let's do that. But we also don't know the hard work that churches like Colby's church is doing to actually build a foundation for their staff and their volunteers to get to that point. And so one thing I would say is try to, as best you can, remove the temptation of comparison. Is let's praise God for the work that he's doing through that church in that area. It doesn't mean that's also the work that you need to be doing right now in your church. And so it's like understanding your cultural context of your staff, of your leadership team, of your volunteer crew, and where are they? Because when I'm like, for me, I look at a church and I get excited, like, man, they're doing that, I want to do that. But it's like, I don't know what the spiritual health of their leadership. They may be way better than what we are. So we need to do the work of just developing that. I think will be huge. And then a really simple, practical thing for leaders, for pastors who are pastoring, maybe young leaders, is they're energetic, they're excited, they're ready to serve, right? They're full of all that. I think a way that we prioritize rest in their lives is we schedule them less, right? And so if you're on Planning Center and you're like, okay, I'm gonna lay out the month and here's our worship team, here's our production team, here's whatever, prioritize at least one Sunday off where they just show up and they just sit and worship. And when you do that, when they look at their schedule, they get their emails and they're gonna say, well, man, I'm off a Sunday. They're gonna probably tell you like, hey, I'm good. Like, let me know. Like, I can serve here. Just tell them no. Be like, no, you're good. Come to church, and prioritize that, because for young leaders, we don't feel like we need that rest a lot of times until we get to the point of burnout, which we've already shared our stories of. We got to that point because probably a lack of prioritizing rest, and so that's a simple thing that we can do. It's our role and responsibility as pastors to steward the people underneath us and shepherd them well. And so let's prioritize rest in how we schedule them to serve at our church.
That's such a good word, Danny. And I really like it because, we've all been the people who have probably served at churches at some point. And we were the ones that maybe said, keep scheduling me. I'm good. I'm happy to be here. And it can be so easy at that moment for us as the leader or you as the leader to say, all right, well, we are really short on people. So if they're willing to do it, let's let them serve once again. And I love what you're saying, because you're literally showing your people, I value you and your health more than my Sunday morning service running perfully. And
let me say this story really quick. Go ahead. Sorry. So for our young adult ministry, we didn't have like a young adult ministry for, like, it started at one point, it stopped, pandemic obviously came. And then, we just saw a lot of college students in our church. So we're like, hey, let's start a young adult something. But we don't have anybody overseeing young adults. So it was a lot of our other staff that were pouring into this ministry that we were trying to develop. And I remember when we started, we decided, let's do an every other week service, just so we don't get burnt out, because we have all our responsibilities. And internally, I was like, man, like, that's going to be so hard. We're not going to create rhythm and excitement. Like, it should be every week. But then naturally, it's kind of turned into like a joy, where we don't meet every single, Tuesday night. We meet every other week. And one, it's created excitement for like the following week to come. But then also what we believe is teaching our young adults is that it's okay to rest every other week. We don't have to come to a service every single week. You already do that on Sunday. And that practice has been really nice. And we've now, because at one point we're like, let's start every other week, let's see how it goes, and then we can talk about going weekly later. But now we're at a point for our young adults, we're like, I don't think we're going to ever move to a weekly service. We're going to keep this rhythm because it prioritizes rest on the off weeks, where they can, enjoy small group, they can do something different versus coming again to another service. And that's been really fruitful for us.
I love that. That's so great. This is actually a great segue into a question that we got from somebody watching named Maggie. And she's talking about how some of their young adult leaders, they're kind of co-vocational, right? And probably a lot of us have these kinds of people, especially, I know, Colby, you're in a church plant. That's like major for co-vocational, right? And so she's talking about how, a lot of their leaders, they're being missional. They're going out in the marketplace. They have 9-to-5 jobs where they're, getting to share the gospel, but then they're also leading in a big way in the church. And although that's effective, sometimes it can feel like it increases burnout for those of us who are trying to be in the workplace and also be in ministry. I know Aaron has done that co-vocational life before in his past, and that was a really exhausting season. Do you guys have any wisdom to share on how to lead people who are co-vocational, trying to do the gospel in their neighborhoods and workplaces and evangelize while also trying to build their local church?
Yeah, I think it personally begins by, I think somebody, number one, like kudos to whoever is like doing that, because that is, I've done bivocational ministry too, and working, basically working two full-time jobs, which sometimes feels like, right. And I just, like, my heart goes up to people who are doing that, because I actually think we need more tent makers like Paul. I think we need more people who, hey, I'm not necessarily, want to be full-time ministry, but I want to serve the body as effectively as I can. At the same time, have a huge influence in my workplace, in the business world, in the marketplace. Like, we need more Christian leaders, people who are heavy hitters in the kingdom, in those marketplaces, in those different arenas of life. I'm a big believer in that. So I think somebody first and foremost needs to be extremely disciplined with their time. And if you're going to be in ministry and also in the marketplace or bivocationally, like, I think discipline in terms of, like, okay, how am I maximizing, making the most of my time? How am I scheduling out my time with my family, making sure I'm getting that personal wellness and care in so I don't burn out, making sure that I'm spending time Sabbathing, that at the same time I'm taking care of my responsibilities at work and in the church. And so it takes a lot of intentionality. I think it takes a lot of intentionality, a higher degree of even intentionality in terms of scheduling, and just making sure that each and every moment that I'm living well and I'm living intentionally. And so, yeah, I think that's a big place. But also, I think we just really need to create more culture, more DNA around that. Look, like, as a leader, as a pastor, I'm going to be gone once a month. Like, I'm taking once a month off, and you won't see me. And I think we need to allow people to kind of catch that rhythm, be like, it's okay. Like, we give people permission to rest because the leader rests. And as a leader is resting and people are catching a vision for, oh, it's okay for me not to exhaust and overload myself to depletion, because I think something like rest and, like, just feeling like I'm leading from a place of wholeness, it starts from the leader. It starts by the leader, with the leader. So, yeah.
That's good.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's great.
Wow.
One, I think I kind of heard like two different questions. One, like, how do we maybe empower people, like, to live out the gospel in their workplace? But then also, how do we, steward that well as they're serving the church? One, if you're like in the workplace, you're that tent maker type person, and you're desiring to live out your faith. Recommendation: Tim Keller, Every Good Endeavor is a fantastic read of just that faith and work, how to live out your faith in your workplace. But two, one thing I constantly do, understanding that we have volunteers that are, parents, the spouses of each other, they have full-time jobs, like all that stuff. And so like we have people who are busy, right? And that's who God has placed with us to serve and lead out in the church. When somebody tells me that they want to serve, I normally ask them two questions. One is, what are you passionate about? Because I want to put them in an area where they're going to serve, where they're going to be passionate about that thing. Some people who are teachers and they love being a teacher, elementary, junior high, high school, whatever. Some people want to teach, so they'll do like a Bible study lesson. But some people who are teachers, like, when they go to church and serve, they want to do something completely opposite of that because they don't want to think about work, right? And so, like, what are you passionate about? And the second question I ask is, how much time do you have? Because I want to use the time, the minimal time that they have, to put them in a place to serve where they're going to feel like they're thriving and feel like they're enjoying what they're doing, because serving should be enjoying. But also understanding, and like you said, Colby, like, it's discipline of time. There's a book called The Sabbath, I believe, by Abraham Heschel. And I love how he describes the Sabbath. He says, you're an architecture you're an architect of your time. And it's a beautiful phrase of just like figuring out where can I jump in. But also it's the understanding, and this is really hard because we process like it's difficult. We have anxiety and it's mental health and burnout. We're still called to carry our cross. We're still called to sacrifice something. So when you serve, you're going to sacrifice a morning that you could be sleeping in. When you do serve, you're called to sacrifice something a little bit for Jesus. And so, or you're sacrificing a night out with friends to be able to go lead a Bible study for some teenagers. Like you're sacrificing something. And so it's that architecture of your time, it's sacrifice, but also it's really figuring out as a pastor speaking into young leaders. Find out what they're passionate about. And it might be something that as a pastor, you didn't even think could be a ministry of your church. That'd be great, man. See what God does there. And then how much time do they have? Honor the time that they can be able to give you, and the fact that they're also, busy living out their lives.
Wow.
This is so powerful. Wow.
So
what
good.
An incredible conversation. Colby and Danny, we're just so grateful for the leaders that you are, for the ministries that you run, for the way that you are influencing the next generation. And thank you for being the kinds of leaders who are modeling what it looks like to suffer well, to avoid burnout, and to pursue rest. We're so grateful for that. For those of you watching, thank you for tuning into a conversation like this. And we hope that this has felt like a breath of fresh air, even a permission giving moment for you to recognize that, yes, your ministry, your life is important, but your soul is what will be present in eternity. And we have the invitation to actually care for the soul that God has given us. Hey, Danny, would you be willing just to pray over the leaders that are watching right now? And then we'll close out.
Yeah, let's pray. Father God, we're so grateful for this opportunity, God. And I'm grateful for Hannah and Aaron, the work that you're doing in their lives and their desire to have these kinds of real conversations because this is the realness of our culture and our world. God, I'm grateful for Colby, the work that you're doing in Portland. God, I pray for their church and their leadership team as he leads out. And God, for all those who are tuning in right now, for those who maybe will tune into this later, for the leaders, pastors, for the young adults that are just maybe processing a call to ministry, living out their ministry. God, I just pray that ultimately our desire is to be obedient towards you, that we would not rush the moment, but we would enjoy and rest in the work that you are doing, God. I love what Colby said, that we would rest in the finished work of Jesus. God, all of this that we get to do is all based out of our relationship with Jesus. None of this is possible, God, without the work that Jesus did. And so we are grateful that the gospel became real to us, God, that we made the decision to believe in and follow Jesus, God. And I pray that we would remind ourselves of Jesus every single day. That would be our morning, that would be our evening. And God, that we would not be overwhelmed by the task, but trust that you are going to empower us and prepare us for what you have for us. And you're also going to supply us with laborers and workers to be able to go after the mission that you have called us to, God. And I pray that for every single church represented, that we would see a revival, that we would see people in all these communities represented come to know Jesus because of the work that you're doing. We love you so much in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming on. Colby and Danny, really appreciate you guys. So for you, believe in you, and excited to see what God does through the rest of your life. Thank you so much for attending this live webinar. We'll see you back Thursday at 10 a.m. Central Time.